We are building the calculator project from the YByte Python curriculum available at www.ybyte.in. Previously, we have seen the learning objectives from this project. Also, we have understood at a high level what the grid method means. The grid geometry manager means when it comes to placing widgets in a nice orderly manner on a Tkinter window. We created a sample project, just got started by creating a window, calling it calculator, fixing its dimensions to say 300 cross 300. Now is the time we are going to get started building the actual project. Now, before I do that, let's just once again very quickly look at what we are after. Remember, we are going to put two labels, the two labels being the expression label and the entry box here, and then a bunch of buttons. In this video, we'll see how we will use the grid method when it comes to the two labels up here. Now, like I said, the best way of doing this, understanding this, is by doing it. So let's get started. Remember, the basic principle of widgets is that first we define them and then we put them on the window. So that same principle applies. I'm going to create a label called expression label. I just call it expr label. Now this is the definition. I call it tk.label. In fact, exactly what is available to me here. So I'm just, I could have used this. So I said tk.table. Now inside this window, because that's my, that's a container where I want to put this, I'm going to create, say, text is equal to expression. Later on we'll remove this, but for now, just to understand that this is an expression label, I put this. I set its background to, let's say, gray color. Now again, you can choose to do a different color over here. I set its width to, let's say, 36. We'll talk about this later. I set its height to height to say 3. I set its border width to, let's say, to 3. Uh, Now again, there's nothing magical about this. It's just the options that I'm using. There are many options. So it's always good to have a set of options that work and then play around with them to get a better understanding. I'm going to set its relief, which means the type of border that we are looking at, to, let's say, in this case, ridge, RIDGE. And I'm going to put this anchor. Now we'll talk about all of this little bit later, but anchor basically, so anchor is, say, tk.e. Now anchor basically controls how the text is going to be justified onto this box, because this is a very wide box. um, Anchor tk.e will make sure that it is right justified, and we'll see again all of this in action. But remember, we first define what we must also place. In this case, I'm going to place this at using the geometry manager. I'm using the grid manager, and I'm going to say dot grid. For example, column equals to 0, row equals to 0, but column span equals to 5. The reason I'm putting column span of 5 is because, as we see from here, underneath this we are going to get 5 columns of buttons. Again, let's see this working, because that brings more clarity. When I run this code, I get a label which is right in front of me, which looks something like this. It is covering the entire screen. Now, so let's see this carefully. Remember, label itself is like a widget which displays information. We have placed it on the window. We have set the text to expression, and that's what we see here. We have set the background to gray, and that's the background we are seeing here. Width is 36. Now, this is quite interesting. How did I get to 36? Well, the idea is that width determines the number of characters that can be placed inside this. Now it's a little bit difficult because the width then depends on the font that we are using. So what I've really done is trial and error. For example, let's say I were to do width of 24. I find that the label looks too small, but if I were to try, let's say width, if I try, on the other hand, if I try width of 40, the label looks too much to the right. So I'm going to just try and set it to say 32. Well, I'm going to set it to 36, because then I find that it just nicely, occupies the window that I have. Now, again, you can adjust this for your window height and so on, window width and so on. Height is set to 3 because I'm saying that it could be 3 lines of text can be written here. Again, it doesn't have to be 3. It depends on what you're looking for. Border width and this ridge control how much is the border and what type of border do I have. So for example, instead of ridge, let's say I can, try another type of border, let's say sunken, and I'm going to, and it looks like a little bit different. I could try, for example, let's say solid, and the border looks like a black color outline on the on the label. Again, the one that I'm going to go with is what I liked, which is ridge, but there's no compulsion whatsoever that you must use this. I'm going to put all the possibilities of this in the description so you can take a look and experiment yourself. Finally, I have a very, very important, argument called anchor. Now, like I said, anchor is making this text justified to the right. Notice here, tk.e is it's a constant. Think of it like a east direction. So I'm telling this guy, okay, look, label, you're quite wide, but I want you to be appearing on the right side of the label. And that's why it's here. Now, obviously, the question, you can try this. If you want it differently, you can make it tk.west. East is exactly opposite of west, so I expect with this that expression should appear over here, and indeed that's what happens. I could try tk dot, let's say, make it more interesting, tk dot, let's say, northwest. It's going to appear over on the top left corner. Now clearly this is useful because depending on what I'm looking for, I can adjust the justification. I can in fact, let's say, make it, call it, let's say I made it north, then I expect it to appear sort of in the middle here, and indeed that's what happened. Let's take one more example. Let's say I made it south, and say east. So in this case, the label would appear on the bottom to the right side. Now, again, all of this is, happening because my width of the label is much more than the text, and likewise is the height. And hence, all these options are coming up. Quite logical, play with them because they make sense at that point, right? I'm going to set the anchor back to E, and when I run it, I get exactly where I was. Now, again, we spoke about column span of 5. Now, we'll move on and create an entry label. So I'll just copy this whole thing first, and I'll call it, let's say, ENTR label for the entry label. Again, define and then place. So here I'm going to go with the text of, let's say, entry. So I'll make it say ENTRY. The background will be gray. So font, I'm going to use a different font. Let's say I call it Arial bold. B has to be small letters. So Arial bold, and of size 15. Now since my font has changed, now remember my width also has to change. So I will, again, by trial and error, I realize that width of 22 is just perfect for this, because remember the width is the number of characters that can be accommodated in this, let's say, box, and that is pretty much all I need to do. However, I do need to make a change where that, which is that I need to put this in, say, row of 1. Now when I run this, now I have to be careful. I have to set this for ENTR grid. So make sure make sure that the first two statements are for the EXPR label, which is the expression label. The next two statements are for the entry label, and I call that ENTR label. Now when I run this, it's interesting. I get two boxes exactly like what I thought, which are covering the entire width, which have both a column span of 5. We saw that before, and their font and everything is according to what we are setting. Now, before I wrap this up, I just want to make a very interesting point. Let's say instead of row number 1, I had put, let's say, row 100, or even anything else, anything more than 0. What you notice is that this still renders exactly the same, and sometimes this is done when we do something in the beginning and then we want to insert some rows, for example, in between. So my point is that so long as this rows and columns, let's say, remain an increasing number, then this will get it displayed exactly the way it is. But just to avoid confusion, I'm going to keep it to 1 because that's kind of logical. Row number 0, row number 1, and and this is how it comes out. Now we are going to move further in this by placing the buttons in the next video. But I hope you found this interesting. And in general, if you think this way of learning is fun, building activities, thinking about it, applying concepts, then look at our website because that's how we learn programming. Thank you so much. Have fun.